Humble girl pays train fare for a stranger, not knowing he is a CEO. What he did surprised everyone. You can skip the introduction. Most of my family are irritated by long ones. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. How are you, my family? May God bless each and every one of you. Before we begin today's story, I want to say a special prayer for my beautiful family. May love, peace, and protection surround you always. Let us pray. Father God, we come before you today with grateful hearts. Please watch over my beautiful family, guide and protect them from harm, and fill their lives with peace and joy. May we continue to grow stronger together, united in love and faith. In Jesus' name, amen. But today I need to speak from my heart. My family, something very serious happened. Yesterday I received a threatening email, and there was even a hacking attempt on my channel. On top of that, more than 10 fake channels are stealing my voice, my style, and pretending to be me. Let me be clear, I only have this one channel. I have poured my heart, soul, and hard work into Mr. Peter Stories, but some people are trying to take it away from me. They're even threatening to hack my channel just to stop me from using my own name and style. I won't lie to you, my family. I am deeply hurt, but I trust in God and I trust in you. Please, if you see any fake channels using my name or voice, do not support them. Unsubscribe, stay away from them, and always make sure you're watching the real Mr. Peter Stories. No one can stop what God has planned for us, my family. We will rise above this. Now, let's put the sadness aside and dive into a powerful story, just for you, my beautiful family. Let's start the story.
Chapter 1. The Chance Encounter. The rain fell mercilessly over the city that Monday morning, turning the world into a blur of gray. Sydney Leroux clutched her leather portfolio against her chest, protecting the precious student artwork for the upcoming fundraiser as she rushed toward the train platform. Her worn boots splashed through puddles, each step a reminder of the leak in her apartment ceiling she couldn't yet afford to fix. The vintage watch on her wrist, her only inheritance from her grandmother, told her she was cutting it close. The train doors slid open with a mechanical sigh as Sydney stepped inside, droplets cascading from her jacket. She found a seat near the middle car, setting her portfolio beside her with the care one might give a newborn. Horizon Community Arts Center was emblazoned across its surface in fading gold letters. She designed the logo herself 3 years ago, when the center was just a dream sustained by determination and maxed out credit cards. 20 minutes into the journey, raised voices drew Sydney's attention. 3 rows ahead, a conductor stood over a well-dressed man, his face flushed with embarrassment. "I understand your situation, sir, but I need to see proof of payment," the conductor insisted, his voice carrying through the quiet car. "I've explained that my wallet was stolen this morning," the man responded, his British accent clipped with frustration. "I've already filed a police report. I can provide you with contact information to verify. Without payment, you'll need to exit at the next stop." The conductor remained unmoved. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, averting their eyes from the scene. Sydney observed the man more carefully. His tailored suit suggested wealth, but the genuine distress in his eyes spoke of something more complicated than entitlement. His hands, artist's hands, she thought instinctively, raked through dark hair that seemed too unruly for his otherwise polished appearance. Before she could second-guess herself, Sydney was on her feet, moving toward them with purpose. "Excuse me," she interjected, pulling her transit card from her pocket. "I'd like to pay for this gentleman's fare." Both men turned to her with surprise. The conductor's eyebrows rose while the stranger's expression transformed from humiliation to astonishment. "That's really unnecessary," the man protested, but Sydney had already handed her card to the conductor. "It's already done," she replied with a smile that transformed her face, revealing a small dimple in her right cheek. "Consider it my good deed for the day." The conductor processed the payment and moved on, leaving them in an awkward silence pierced by the rhythmic clacking of the train on the tracks. "I insist on repaying you," the man said, reaching for a business card that wasn't there, another reminder of his stolen wallet. "I'm Joss, by the way, Joss Butler." "Sydney LaRue." She offered her hand, noticing the warmth of his grasp, the calluses surprising on what she'd assumed would be corporate soft palms. "And don't worry about it. The universe has a way of balancing things out." Joss studied her with curious intensity. "At least take my contact information so I can—" The train slowed and Sydney gathered her portfolio. "This is my stop." She hesitated, then made an impulsive decision. She pulled out a flyer for her upcoming student exhibition and handed it to him. "If you're ever in the neighborhood, stop by. The kids' work is really something special." Before Joss could respond, Sydney was moving toward the doors, her wild curls bouncing with each step. She turned back just once, catching his gaze still fixed on her, something unreadable in his expression. The doors closed between them like the ending of one story and the beginning of another. Outside, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight broke through clouds, creating halos around the puddles on the platform. Sydney hurried toward the arts center, unaware that the man she'd left behind was memorizing the address on her flyer, already calculating how soon he could plausibly appear there. Inside the train, Joss Butler, CEO of Horizon Tech, whose net worth exceeded 9 figures, sat holding a wrinkled flyer for a community arts exhibition, feeling strangely like a man who'd just been given something far more valuable than a train fare. For the first time in months, the weight of his company's impending merger, the board's relentless pressure, and the emptiness of his penthouse apartment faded from his mind, replaced by the memory of kind eyes and a dimpled smile. He traced the arts center's name on the flyer, a smile tugging at his lips as he realized it shared a word with his company. Horizon. A fitting coincidence for what felt inexplicably like a new beginning. The universe indeed had strange ways of balancing things out. The train resumed its journey through the awakening city, carrying Joss away from his intended destination. He would miss his morning meeting, the first time in his 15-year career. His assistant would be frantic, his board members furious. But as the cityscape blurred outside the window, Joss found himself remarkably unconcerned with any of it. Instead, he pulled out his phone and searched for Sydney LaRue's Arts Center, discovering a modest website with a passionate mission statement about bringing arts education to underserved communities. Photos showed a diverse group of children painting, sculpting, and drawing in a space that looked worn but vibrant with creativity. The last image caught his attention. Sydney surrounded by her students, her smile radiant as she helped a young girl hold a paintbrush. The caption read, "Creating tomorrow's artists today, one brushstroke at a time." Joss felt something stir within him, a forgotten sensation he eventually recognized as inspiration. It had been years since he'd felt it, not since before Horizon Tech became an industry giant, and his life became an endless cycle of acquisitions, expansions, and shareholder meetings. He saved the Arts Center's address to his phone and made a decision. The merger documents would wait. The board meeting would be rescheduled. For once, Joss Butler would follow an impulse that had nothing to do with market analysis or profit margins. As the train continued its journey, Joss found himself watching fellow passengers with new awareness. How many invisible connections were formed and broken each day on this train? How many lives intersected briefly, meaningfully, before continuing on separate tracks? And how many people, like him, moved through life surrounded by crowds yet profoundly alone? For reasons he couldn't yet articulate, Joss knew his encounter with Sydney LaRue wouldn't be their last. What he couldn't know was how completely this chance meeting would transform both their lives, setting them on a collision course that would challenge everything they thought they knew about success, sacrifice, and the extraordinary power of being seen by someone who looks beyond the surface. The train announcer called the next stop, but Jose remained seated, still holding the flyer, still seeing Sydney's face in his mind. For the first time in years, he was in no hurry to reach his destination. Chapter 2. The Search. 3 days passed before Jos Butler gathered the courage to visit the Horizon Community Arts Center. 3 days of distracted meetings where his executives exchanged concerned glances as their normally laser-focused CEO stared out floor-to-ceiling windows. 3 days of uncharacteristic indecision as he typed and deleted texts to his assistant about acquiring the most appropriate thank you gift for a woman whose only possessions he'd observed were a threadbare portfolio and a vintage watch. In the end, practicality won. Jos arrived at the converted warehouse on Friday afternoon, his driver looking conspicuously out of place in the working-class neighborhood, as Jos emerged carrying 3 large boxes of professional-grade art supplies. The building's faded brick exterior revealed its industrial past, but vibrant murals transformed the utilitarian walls into canvases of possibility. Children's artwork filled every window, a kaleidoscope of imagination framed by peeling paint. Jose hesitated at the entrance, suddenly aware of how out of place his bespoke Italian suit appeared in this environment. Before he could reconsider, joyful chaos erupted from inside. Children's laughter, the clatter of supplies, and above it all, a voice he recognized instantly. "Amazing work, Zuri. I love how you're using complementary colors to create contrast." Jos followed the sound, finding himself in a large open space divided by movable partitions covered in artwork. Afternoon sunlight streamed through skylights, illuminating dust motes dancing above tables where children bent over their creations with infectious concentration. And there was Sydney, moving between students with balletic grace, her hair pulled back in a scarf that exploded with color like a painter's palette. She wore denim overalls splattered with paint over a simple white t-shirt, yet somehow possessed more presence than executives in $1,000 suits who competed for Jos's attention daily. He stood watching, boxes growing heavy in his arms, struck by the authenticity of the scene. No one was performing here. There was no strategic positioning or calculated networking. Just pure creative engagement that made the sleek, minimalist perfection of his corporate headquarters suddenly seem sterile and lifeless. A young boy noticed him first. "Miss Sydney, there's a fancy man with boxes watching you." Sydney turned, her expression cycling rapidly through surprise, recognition, and something unreadable before settling on a polite smile. "Class, continue working on your perspective drawings. I'll be right back." She approached Jose with measured steps. "Mr. Butler, this is unexpected. Please call me Jose," he said, suddenly feeling like an intruder. "I hope I'm not interrupting. We're just finishing our Friday afternoon session." Her eyes fell to the boxes. "Those look heavy." "They're for you. For the center," he clarified, setting them down. "A proper thank you for the train fare, and please don't say it's too much. Compared to what this place provides for these children, it's nothing." Sydney's professional reserve softened slightly. "The art supply store owner will have a heart attack when I walk in with these. We usually buy the damaged goods they sell at discount." She opened the top box, revealing sets of professional-grade paints, brushes, and canvases. Her fingers traced the supplies with reverence that made Joe swallow hard. "Would you like a tour?" she offered, gesturing around the space. "See what that train fare is really supporting." For the next 30 minutes, Sydney guided Jos through the center as children finished their projects and were collected by parents. She showed him the pottery studio with its second-hand kiln, the digital media lab cobbled together from donated computers, and the small gallery where student work was displayed with the same care a prestigious museum might give to famous masterpieces. "Most of these kids have never been to an art museum," Sydney explained as they stood before an impressive abstract painting. Their families are working multiple jobs just to cover rent and groceries, but talent doesn't recognize socio-economic boundaries. Joe studied the painting with genuine appreciation. This is extraordinary. The composition, the emotional impact. Who's the artist? Darius. He's 14 and has already experienced more hardship than most adults. Pride infused her voice. Art gives these kids a language for processing experiences they don't have words for yet. For some, it's literally saving their lives. As the last student departed with a shy wave to Sydney, they found themselves alone in the suddenly quiet center. The transition from chaotic creativity to stillness was jarring, like the moment after an orchestra finishes a powerful symphony. "Coffee?" Sydney offered, gesturing toward a small kitchenette. "Fair warning, it's terrible, but it's hot." Joe smiled. "I've developed a high tolerance for terrible coffee over years of international business meetings." They settled at a paint-splattered table, Sydney pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. The comfortable silence between them surprised Joss, who was accustomed to people nervously filling conversational gaps in his presence. "So," Sydney finally said, "are you going to tell me what a man who can afford that watch and those shoes was doing without a train fare on Monday?" Joss laughed, appreciating her directness. "Mugged, I'm afraid. Rather embarrassing for someone who prides himself on awareness." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a fading bruise. "I refused to give up my grandfather's watch. The wallet seemed the better sacrifice." Sydney's expression softened. "Family heirlooms over credit cards. I respect that choice." "What about you?" Joss asked, nodding toward her wrist. "That's a beautiful vintage piece." Sydney glanced at her watch, surprised by his observation. "My grandmother's. The only thing of hers I have." She paused, then added quietly, "Foster care doesn't leave you with many family treasures." The vulnerability in that simple statement struck Joss deeply. Before he could respond, Sydney straightened, her professional demeanor returning like armor being donned. "I should ask, what exactly does Horizon Tech do? Your company name sounds familiar." The question was innocent, but Joss felt unexpected hesitation. How could he explain that his technology conglomerate had recently acquired properties in this very neighborhood for redevelopment? That his board was pressuring him to support luxury condominiums that would raise property values and force out residents like Sydney's students? "We're in technology development and investment," he answered carefully. "Among other things." Sydney studied him, sensing the evasion. "Must be fascinating," she said neutrally, then changed the subject. "How did you find us anyway? I don't recall mentioning the center's address." "Your flyer," Jose admitted. "I hope that's not crossing a line." "Just surprising," she replied honestly. "Most people in your position would have sent an assistant with a gift card and considered the debt paid. I'm not most people." The words emerged more intensely than he'd intended. Sydney held his gaze. "No, I don't think you are." The ancient coffee maker gurgled in the background, marking time in their silence, a silence filled with unspoken recognition that this moment represented a choice. They could exchange pleasantries, express gratitude, and part ways as strangers whose lives briefly intersected. Or they could acknowledge the inexplicable connection humming between them like a current, demanding exploration. Before either could decide, Sydney's phone chimed with a calendar alert. She glanced at it and sighed. "The building inspector. Third time this month." Joss raised an eyebrow. "Problems?" "Nothing a spare $50,000 wouldn't fix," she replied with forced lightness. "Apparently, a building this old needs updated sprinkler systems, accessibility ramps, and electrical work to remain compatible with current safety standards." "And if those standards aren't met?" Sydney's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Then 50 children lose their artistic home, and I lose my purpose. She stood, straightening her paint-splattered overalls with dignity that struck Joe as profoundly noble. But we'll figure it out. We always do. Joss rose too, suddenly acutely aware of the vast difference in their circumstances. The money she needed was what he might spend on a weekend getaway, without a second thought. "Thank you for the tour," he said, surprising himself by extending his hand. "And the terrible coffee." Sydney's handshake was firm, her skin warm against his. "Thank you for the supplies. They'll make a real difference." As Jose turned to leave, a half-finished canvas in the corner caught his attention. A stunning city skyline at dawn, buildings catching first light like ships emerging from darkness. "Who's the artist?" he asked, drawn to its raw emotion. "That's one of mine," Sydney admitted, a hint of vulnerability returning. "I don't get much time to paint anymore, but sometimes after the kids leave." "It's extraordinary," Joss said with genuine admiration. "The perspective, the light. You're capturing something essential about the city." Sydney's expression transformed with unexpected pleasure at his specific, knowledgeable praise. "You know art." "I studied it before business became my life," Joss admitted. "Another lifetime ago." Their eyes met in shared recognition, two people who had once created for the pure joy of creation before adult responsibilities reshaped their paths. "I should go," Joe said reluctantly. "The inspector—" "Yes." Sydney nodded. "Thank you again for the supplies." At the door, Joss turned back. "Sydney?" She looked up, her expression open and curious, in a way that made his carefully planned words evaporate. Instead, he heard himself say, "I'd like to learn to paint again. Would you teach me?" The question hung between them, revealing more vulnerability than any business negotiation ever had. For a terrifying moment, Joss thought she would refuse. And why wouldn't she? What could a wealthy CEO possibly offer that she needed? Sydney studied him with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see beneath his carefully constructed surface. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. A real smile that transformed her entire face and sent an inexplicable warmth through Jose's chest. "First lesson is Tuesday evening at 7, she said. "Bring clothes you don't mind ruining. Art is messy business, Mr. Butler." "Just Jose," he corrected, unable to suppress his smile. "Just Jose," she agreed, her expression suggesting that she understood this was about something far more significant than painting lessons. As Jose left the center, the afternoon sun cast his shadow long against the sidewalk. For the first time in years, he felt like a man stepping into unknown territory without a strategic plan. And strangely, wonderfully, alive because of it. Chapter 3. The Proposition. Sydney stood before the building inspector, forcing herself to breathe evenly as he flipped through his clipboard with bureaucratic indifference. The fluorescent lights above flickered erratically, as if providing physical evidence for his damning assessment. "Ms. LaRue, I don't make these regulations," he sighed, handing her the official notice. "But this building needs significant upgrades to meet code requirements. You've had 3 extensions already." Sydney scanned the document, her stomach sinking at the final deadline. 30 days. "We're applying for grants, running fundraisers." "I understand your situation," the inspector interrupted, his expression softening slightly. "But after the community center fire across town last year, these regulations are being strictly enforced. I can't make exceptions, even for good causes." After he left, Sydney sank onto a paint-splattered stool, the notice trembling in her hands. 3 years of work, hundreds of children served, countless lives transformed through art, all potentially ending in 30 days. The recent fundraiser had barely covered operating expenses, and their grant applications remained unanswered. She'd already maxed out her personal credit cards and taken a second mortgage on her small house. The center had survived previous crises, but $50,000 might as well be $5 million. Even selling some of her own artwork wouldn't generate nearly enough. Sydney pressed her palms against her eyes, refusing to let tears fall. She had 30 days to perform a miracle. Lost in desperation, she didn't hear the door open. Joss's voice startled her back to awareness. "Is this a bad time?" Sydney quickly composed herself, tucking the notice into her pocket. The official inspection happened sooner than expected. She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Did you forget something?" Joss studied her with unsettling perceptiveness. "No, but I've been thinking about something since I left." He glanced around the center, taking in details he'd missed earlier. The bucket catching water from a leaking ceiling, the duct-taped electrical outlets, the ancient radiator that clearly couldn't adequately heat the space in winter. "You mentioned the building needs work," he continued carefully. "Would you consider letting me help?" Sydney's defenses immediately rose. "We don't need charity, Joss." "I'm not offering charity." He took a step closer. "I'm offering a business proposition." "What could a community arts center possibly offer? Horizon Tech?" Sydney asked skeptically. Joss smiled, surprising her. "Not Horizon Tech. Me personally." He gestured to her half-finished painting. "I meant what I said about wanting to learn. Art was my passion before I got lost in spreadsheets and acquisitions." Sydney crossed her arms. "And what exactly are you proposing?" "I'll fund the necessary building repairs," he stated simply. "In exchange, you'll teach me to paint, privately, once a week, for 6 months." Sydney's eyebrows shot up. "You want to spend $50,000 on painting lessons?" "I want to rediscover something I lost," Joss corrected, his voice softening with unexpected vulnerability, "and help preserve something valuable in the process." Sydney studied him, trying to discern his true motivation. His expression seemed genuinely earnest, lacking the calculated charm she'd expect from a corporate executive. "Why not just hire a professional artist as a private tutor?" she challenged. "There are instructors with far more impressive credentials than mine." Joss held her gaze steadily. "Because they didn't pay my train fare when I needed it." The simple answer disarmed her completely. "I don't trust easily, Mr. Butler," Sydney admitted after a long moment, "especially men in expensive suits offering solutions to problems they shouldn't know I have." "Just Joss," he reminded her gently. "And skepticism is healthy. Have your lawyer review everything. I'll cover those costs too." Sydney almost laughed. "My lawyer is my friend's cousin who helped me file the 501c3 paperwork in exchange for teaching his daughter watercolors." Joss smiled. "Then I'll have my lawyers draft something simple and fair. You review it, make any changes you want." He paused, then added softly, "This isn't a trap, Sydney. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places, the same way kindness sometimes comes from strangers on trains." The reference to their first meeting struck a chord. Sydney glanced around the center, at the children's artwork covering every surface, the dedicated space she'd built from nothing, the home she'd created for young people who often had nowhere else to express themselves. "Tuesdays at 7, she finally said, extending her hand. "Don't be late, and wear something you don't mind getting paint on." Joss's smile was transformative, erasing the corporate facade and revealing something far more genuine beneath. "I wouldn't dare." 2 weeks later, Sydney stood in the center's main room, transformed by construction crews working at remarkable speed. New electrical systems, accessibility ramps, proper fire exits, a state-of-the-art sprinkler system, all installed by contractors who'd appeared the very day after she'd signed Joss's simple agreement. The building inspector had returned that morning, astonished by the changes, and issued a clean bill of health that would keep the center operational for years to come. Now, Sydney waited nervously for Joss's first lesson, an easel set up near the window where the late afternoon light created perfect conditions. She'd spent hours planning what to teach him, vacillating between elementary basics and more challenging concepts. Something told her Joss Butler wasn't a man who responded well to being underestimated. The door opened precisely at 7. Joss entered wearing faded jeans and a simple gray t-shirt, so different from his corporate armor that Sydney momentarily stared. He carried a bottle of wine and wore an expression of such boyish anticipation that something unexpected fluttered in Sydney's chest. "I brought celebration for your building certification," he explained, holding up the wine. "And I dressed for mess, as instructed." Sydney smiled despite her nerves. "The dress code is perfect, but we paint first, celebrate after. Alcohol and proper brush technique don't mix well." Joss set down the wine and approached the empty canvas with reverence that surprised her. His fingers traced the wooden frame of the easel with familiarity. "When did you stop?" Sydney asked quietly, recognizing the look of someone reuniting with a long-lost love. "Senior year of university," Joss answered, his British accent more pronounced with emotion. "My father made it clear that the family expected me to pursue practical applications for my talents." "So you became a tech CEO instead of an artist," Sydney observed, setting up her own easel beside his. "Quite a detour. One that made me very wealthy and very—" He trailed off, searching for the right word. "Unfulfilled," Sydney suggested. Joss looked at her with surprise, as if she'd read something in him that few people noticed. "Precisely." Sydney handed him a charcoal pencil. "We start with basic forms. Everything in the world can be broken down into spheres, cylinders, cones, and cubes. Show me what you remember." For the next 2 hours, Sydney watched Joss rediscover his forgotten skills. His natural talent was evident despite years of neglect, his concentration absolute as he sketched with increasing confidence. She provided occasional guidance, but mostly observed his process with professional appreciation and personal fascination. As twilight deepened outside, Sydney turned on the studio lights. Joss blinked, emerging from his creative trance like a diver surfacing from deep water. "I forgot how time disappears," he admitted, looking at his charcoal-stained hands with wonder. "In meetings, I check my watch every 10 minutes. But this," he gestured to his drawing, a simple arrangement of geometric forms that nonetheless showed remarkable understanding of light and shadow. "You have natural talent," Sydney acknowledged, studying his work. "But more importantly, you have patience. Many technically skilled people lack that." Joss turned to her, his expression open in a way that made him seem younger, unburdened. "Thank you for this. It's been—" He searched for words. "It's been too long. Now we can celebrate," Sydney declared, retrieving the wine and 2 mismatched mugs. The center had no proper glasses. "To passing inspection and returning to abandoned passions." They settled on the worn sofa in the corner, drinking excellent wine from chipped ceramic as darkness fell outside. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, moving from art techniques to childhood dreams, from favorite painters to philosophical perspectives on creativity's purpose. "What made you start the center?" Joss asked, genuinely curious. Sydney traced the rim of her mug, considering how much to reveal. "Art saved me," she finally said. "My life in foster care was unstable. But a high school art teacher noticed I had talent and gave me a key to the art room. I could go there any time, even weekends." Her voice softened with memory. "It became my sanctuary. I promised myself that if I ever had the means, I'd create that same safe space for other children." Joss absorbed this, his respect for her visibly deepening. "And you did exactly that. With considerably less funding than Horizon Tech," Sydney joked, deflecting the intensity of his admiration. "Money doesn't always build meaningful things," Joss replied thoughtfully. "My company's worth billions, but what have we really created?" Faster technology, more efficient systems, all tools that ultimately distance people from real connection. Says the man who just funded our entire building renovation, Sydney pointed out with a smile. Joss laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Perhaps I'm finally finding better uses for it. Something shifted in the atmosphere between them, a deepening connection that went beyond teacher-student or benefactor-recipient. For a moment, they were simply two people recognizing something essential in each other. The center's ancient heating system kicked on with a mechanical groan, breaking the spell. Sydney glanced at her watch, surprised to find it was nearly midnight. "I should go," Joss said, rising reluctantly. "But I'll see you next Tuesday." "Same time," Sydney confirmed, walking him to the door. "Bring your courage. We're moving to color, and there's no hiding behind the forgiving nature of charcoal." At the threshold, Joss turned back. "Sydney, yes, thank you." The words were simple but laden with meaning that extended far beyond the evening's lesson. Sydney smiled, something new and unfamiliar warming her chest. "Thank you for remembering how to see." After Joss left, Sydney remained in the doorway, watching his retreating figure until he turned the corner. The practical part of her mind warned against the dangerous territory she was entering, developing feelings for a man whose world operated by entirely different rules than hers. But another part, the artist's heart that recognized authenticity in unexpected places, whispered that sometimes the most beautiful creations emerged from the most unlikely combinations. Sydney closed the door and returned to their easels, still standing side by side in the quiet studio. She studied Joss's drawing, technically proficient but revealing something more valuable, the unmistakable mark of someone rediscovering their authentic voice after years of silence. With gentle fingers, she touched the edge of his canvas, leaving a small, almost imperceptible fingerprint in the corner. An artist's tradition of blessing another's work. Whether their paths continued to intertwine or diverged after their 6-month arrangement, Sydney had the unshakable sense that something significant had begun this evening. Something neither of them had been looking for, but both had perhaps been waiting to find. Chapter 4. Walls Coming Down. The Tuesday evening painting sessions quickly became sacred territory for both Sydney and Joss. Week by week, as autumn leaves turned from vibrant orange to brittle brown outside the studio windows, something equally transformative was happening inside. Joss's dormant artistic talents reawakened under Sydney's patient guidance, while the carefully constructed walls they'd built around their hearts began to show the first signs of vulnerability. "You're still thinking like a CEO," Sydney observed during their 5th session, watching Joss struggle with a particularly challenging perspective exercise. "You want the perfect outcome immediately, without embracing the process." Joss stepped back from his canvas with frustration. "In my world, inefficiency costs millions. In art, inefficiency often leads to discovery," Sydney countered, approaching his easel. She stood beside him, close enough that he could detect the faint scent of lavender and turpentine that seemed permanently infused in her skin. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to his brush. When he nodded, Sydney's hand covered his, gently guiding his brush through a series of seemingly chaotic strokes that eventually revealed an entirely new dimension to his painting. The momentary contact sent electricity through Joss's arm, though he maintained his carefully neutral expression. "See?" Sydney smiled, stepping back. "Sometimes you have to trust that the mess will lead somewhere beautiful." "Is that your life philosophy as well?" Joss asked, studying her with increasing fascination. Sydney laughed, the sound echoing through the empty studio. "Hardly. Outside of art, I'm pathologically organized. My spice rack is alphabetized." "Now that I can't picture," Joss teased, his formal demeanor softening as it always did in her presence. "You haven't seen my apartment," Sydney replied without thinking, then flushed slightly at the unintended implication. Joss turned back to his canvas, hiding a smile. Perhaps, someday. These moments, brief exchanges laden with unacknowledged tension, had become increasingly frequent between them. Each week revealed new layers, Joss discovering Sydney's encyclopedic knowledge of art history and her secret passion for 1940s jazz, Sydney learning about Joss's estrangement from his aristocratic family, who'd never forgiven him for choosing technology over their generational banking business. On this particular Tuesday, rain lashed against the windows with unusual ferocity, creating a cocoon of intimacy around their shared workspace. They'd moved from basic techniques to personal expression, with Sydney encouraging Joss to paint from memory rather than observation. Paint something that represents a turning point in your life, she'd instructed. A moment where everything changed. Joss worked with uncharacteristic hesitation, his brush moving tentatively across the canvas. Sydney focused on her own work, occasionally glancing at his progress with professional curiosity. When they broke for their customary mid-lesson tea, Joss had upgraded the center's kitchen with a proper electric kettle and quality tea after complaining about Sydney's microwave method. She saw his painting clearly for the first time and fell silent. He'd created a stunning depiction of a train interior, morning light streaming through windows onto empty seats. In the foreground, a single train ticket lay abandoned on the floor, rendered with such precision it seemed one could reach into the canvas and pick it up. The perspective drew the viewer's eye toward two figures in the distance, mere suggestions of forms rather than detailed portraits, yet somehow capturing a moment of profound connection. "It's the day we met," Sydney said softly, recognition dawning. Joss nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "You asked for a turning point." The simple admission hung between them, shifting something fundamental in their carefully maintained dynamic. Sydney's hand moved unconsciously to her chest, as if physically containing the emotion his words evoked. "Would you like to see mine?" she offered, leading him to her easel. Sydney's canvas depicted a child's hand, small, dark-skinned, rendered with exquisite detail, reaching toward an adult hand offering a paintbrush. The background remained abstract, but the emotion conveyed through the nearly touching fingers was palpable. "My first foster mother," Sydney explained quietly. "She had no money for toys, but she bought me a set of watercolors from the dollar store. She said, 'Some kids need words to speak their truth. I think you need colors.'" Joss studied the painting with genuine admiration. She was right. "She died before I could thank her properly," Sydney continued, vulnerability evident in her voice. "Before I could tell her that her small kindness changed everything for me." "Sometimes the most profound impacts come from the smallest moments of humanity," Joss replied, thinking of his own painting, of a simple train fare that had somehow altered his entire perspective. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows like insistent memories demanding acknowledgement. Thunder rolled in the distance as they returned to their paintings, each acutely aware of the subtle shift that had occurred between them. Later, as they cleaned brushes side by side at the industrial sink, Joss broke their comfortable silence. "Tell me about foster care, if you don't mind." Sydney's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their methodical cleaning. 7 homes in 12 years, she began, her voice matter-of-fact despite the weight of her words. "Some were decent, some were nightmares, none were permanent." "That must have been incredibly difficult for a child," Joss observed, his voice gentle. "It teaches you not to get attached," Sydney acknowledged with practiced lightness. "To places or people." Joss carefully set his brushes on the drying rack. "Yet you've created this incredibly nurturing space for children. You've dedicated your life to helping them form attachments to art, to creativity, to self-expression." Sydney looked up at him, struck by his perception. "Perhaps we tried to build what we needed most," she offered quietly. "And what do you need now?" The question emerged before Joss could reconsider its implications. Sydney held his gaze, the vulnerability in her expression both terrifying and exhilarating. That's a dangerous question. I'm finding that the most meaningful questions usually are, Joss replied, maintaining their connection across the narrow space between them. Sydney broke eye contact first, returning to her brushes with deliberate focus. "I've learned to fill my own needs," she said finally. "It's safer that way." "Safer, perhaps," Joss acknowledged. "But is it fulfilling?" The question lingered between them as lightning flashed outside, momentarily illuminating the studio in harsh white light. In that flash, Sydney saw something in Joss's expression that mirrored her own carefully guarded loneliness. The isolation of someone who had built a life that looked impressive from the outside, but left them hollow within. "Your turn for uncomfortable revelations," Sydney deflected, hanging her brushes on the drying rack. "Tell me about your family, the banking dynasty you abandoned for tech." Joss's smile held no humor. "Not much to tell. The Butlers have been moving money for generations, old money serving even older money. I was the disappointing heir who preferred painting to portfolios and coding to client meetings." "But you still ended up in business," Sydney observed. "On my terms," Joss clarified. "Technology felt democratic, creating tools anyone could use rather than services only the wealthy could access." He paused, a shadow crossing his features. "At least, that was the original vision." "And now?" Sydney prompted, sensing his disillusionment. Joss leaned against the sink, suddenly looking exhausted beyond mere physical fatigue. "Now I run board meetings where we discuss market penetration and shareholder value, while the original mission gets lost in quarterly projections." He shook his head. "My father would be ironically proud." The raw honesty in his admission struck Sydney deeply. Without thinking, she reached out, her paint-stained fingers lightly touching his forearm in a gesture of understanding. The simple contact sent electricity through both of them, causing Sydney to withdraw her hand as if burned. "It's getting late," she said, taking a step back. "And the storm's getting worse." As if on cue, the lights flickered ominously, then stabilized. Joss glanced at his watch, surprised to find it was nearly midnight. Their lessons, originally planned for 2 hours, had stretched progressively longer each week. "I should go," he agreed reluctantly. "My driver's probably asleep in the car by now." Sydney rolled her eyes. "Of course you have a driver waiting." "Professional hazard," Joss replied with a self-deprecating smile. "Though lately I've been considering the merits of public transportation. I've had rather extraordinary luck there." Their eyes met again, amusement giving way to something deeper, more complex. The studio felt charged with unspoken possibilities and equally powerful hesitations. Another crack of thunder broke the moment, followed by the distinct sound of heavy rain finding a new leak in the ceiling. "Perfect," Sydney sighed, grabbing a bucket from the utility closet. "Just what we needed." Joss watched her position the bucket with practiced efficiency. "I thought we fixed all the leaks." "Buildings this old have secrets," Sydney replied, water already drumming rhythmically into the container. "Just when you think you've solved all the problems, new ones appear. Like people," Joss observed quietly. Sydney looked up at him, struck by the parallel. "Exactly like people." A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, making them both jump. Sydney's phone chimed with a weather alert, which she checked with growing concern. "Flash flood warning," she announced. "They're recommending no travel for the next few hours." She glanced at Joss apologetically. "You might be stuck here for a while." Joss pulled out his own phone, scrolling through weather updates. "My driver confirms the roads around here are already underwater." He looked up, an unexpected lightness in his expression. "It seems we're having an impromptu sleepover." Sydney laughed despite her concern. I hope you don't expect five-star accommodations. We have a couch in the break room and emergency blankets for when the heat fails. I've slept in worse conditions during startup days, Joss replied, rolling up his sleeves. More concerning is this leak. Do you have more buckets? For the next hour, they worked side by side, securing the studio against the storm's assault, positioning containers under new leaks, moving artwork to safer locations, and reinforcing a window that threatened to give way under the wind's pressure. The shared crisis created a new dimension to their relationship, partners in a minor emergency, revealing how naturally they worked together. When they'd done all they could, Sydney produced emergency candles from a supply cabinet. Just in case the power goes, she explained, setting them strategically around the space. The backup generator only powers essential systems. You're remarkably prepared, Joss observed. Foster care survival skills, Sydney replied with practiced lightness. Always plan for the worst while hoping for the best. Joss studied her in the soft candlelight. Is that why you hesitate to trust this? Whatever's happening between us? The direct question caught Sydney off guard. For weeks, they'd been dancing around the growing attraction, the deepening connection that transcended their teacher-student arrangement. Now, trapped together by nature's fury, the pretense seemed impossible to maintain. I don't know what's happening between us, Sydney answered honestly, sinking onto the worn sofa. I know you're a student. I know you funded this center. I know our worlds couldn't be more different. Joss sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Those are facts, not feelings. Sydney met his gaze directly. Feelings are dangerous luxury items for someone like me. Like you. Someone who's learned that permanence is an illusion, she clarified. People leave, Joss. Sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance, but the result is the same. Joss was silent for a long moment, the storm's chaos outside contrasting with the strange stillness between them. What if, he finally said, his voice barely audible above the rain, just once, someone stayed? The vulnerability in his question cracked something open inside Sydney, a door she'd kept firmly closed since childhood. I don't know, she whispered. I've never experienced that. Neither have I, Joss admitted, surprising her. Not really. I've had relationships, of course, but always with an escape route carefully mapped. Always with people who wanted Joss Butler, CEO, not just Joss. The man who forgot his wallet, Sydney supplied with a small smile. Exactly, Joss laughed softly. The imperfect human beneath the press releases. Sydney turned to face him fully. I see him, you know. That man. More clearly with each lesson. Joss's eyes darkened with emotion. That's what terrifies and exhilarates me. You see parts of me I'd forgotten existed. Outside, the storm reached new intensity, rain hammering against the windows like nature's percussion. Inside, a different kind of storm was brewing, one composed of long-suppressed desires and carefully guarded hearts, finally considering the possibility of surrender. I should check the other rooms for leaks, Sydney said suddenly, standing with nervous energy. The intensity of the moment overwhelmed her practiced defenses. Joss remained seated, respecting her need for space. Of course. Sydney moved through the darkened center, checking windows and positioning additional buckets, her mind racing. Every instinct, honed by years of disappointment, warned her to maintain boundaries, to protect herself from inevitable pain. Yet something deeper, something starved for genuine connection, urged her toward the extraordinary man sitting in her studio, a man who looked at her with such unguarded appreciation that it made her breath catch. When she returned, Joss had built a small nest of emergency blankets on the floor beside their easels and was studying his train painting with critical focus. It needs something, he said without turning. It feels unfinished. Sydney approached, grateful for the shift to safer artistic territory. She stood beside him, considering the canvas. It needs resolution. Right now, the figures are disconnected. The viewer is left wondering if they ever truly meet. Joss turned to her, the painting forgotten. Do they meet? Sydney knew they weren't discussing art anymore. That depends. On what? On whether they're brave enough to risk disappointment for the possibility of something extraordinary. Joss took a careful step closer. And if one of them has spent a lifetime avoiding risks, then perhaps the other needs to be brave enough for both, Sydney whispered. The center's lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely, leaving them in darkness broken only by the candle's warm glow and occasional flashes of lightning. In that intimate illumination, Joss slowly raised his hand to Sydney's face, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. His fingers traced her cheekbone with reverent gentleness, as if she were made of precious materials that might shatter under too firm a touch. I've wanted to do this since you handed that conductor your train pass, he confessed. Sydney leaned almost imperceptibly into his touch. I've wanted to let you since you showed up with art supplies and actually knew the difference between cadmium red and alizarin crimson. Joss laughed softly, the sound vibrating between them. Very discerning standards. The highest, Sydney agreed, her own hand rising to cover his against her cheek. The storm raged outside, but neither noticed as Joss slowly, carefully closed the distance between them. His lips met hers with gentle question rather than presumptive demand, a kiss that asked permission even as it was given. Sydney answered by drawing closer, her hand sliding behind his neck as the kiss deepened from tentative exploration to mutual discovery. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Sydney rested her forehead against his. "This complicates everything," she whispered. "Beautifully so," Joss replied, his arms encircling her waist with protective tenderness. They remained entwined as the candlelight flickered shadows across their faces, two people from vastly different worlds, finding rare sanctuary in each other's arms, while the storm that had forced their honesty continued its cleansing fury outside. Tomorrow would bring practical concerns, rational objections, and the harsh light of their different realities. But for tonight, in the intimate darkness of the studio, they allowed themselves to simply be. Two souls recognizing in each other something essential that had been missing from their carefully constructed lives. "Stay with me tonight," Sydney whispered, not as seduction, but as simple truth. "Just stay." Joss's answer was another kiss, this one deeper, an unspoken promise that, for this night at least, neither would be alone with their walls finally, beautifully coming down. Chapter 5. The Gala. 3 weeks after the stormy night that transformed their relationship, Sydney stood before a mirror, barely recognizing her reflection. The midnight blue gown, borrowed from her friend Zara, draped elegantly across her figure, her wild curls tamed into a sophisticated updo. Tonight marked her first appearance in Joss's professional world, accompanying him to Horizon Tech's annual charity gala. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up," Sydney admitted, touching her grandmother's silver pendant, "like I'm pretending to belong in his world." "Honey, with those cheekbones, you could belong anywhere," Zara assured her. "Besides, you're not going for the other guests, you're going for him." When Sydney opened her door to Joss, the appreciation in his eyes made every moment of preparation worthwhile. He stood momentarily speechless, taking in her transformation. "You are breathtaking," he finally managed, his voice roughened with genuine emotion. The sleek black car waiting at the curb represented everything Sydney found intimidating about Joss's world. Its opulence, its exclusivity, its casual relationship with wealth she could scarcely comprehend. As the chauffeur held the door, she hesitated imperceptibly. Joss noticed, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "We don't have to go. We could get takeout and eat on your rooftop instead. The genuine alternative touched Sydney deeply. No, she decided. I want to see this part of your life. The hotel's grand ballroom dazzled with crystal chandeliers and elegantly dressed attendees. Sydney's grip on Joss's arm tightened as they entered, hundreds of eyes assessing the company's CEO and his unexpected companion. To her surprise, she found herself enjoying these interactions. Her genuine curiosity and refreshing authenticity drew people to her, creating moments of real connection amid the social performance. They reached the auction area, where Joss guided Sydney toward a section she hadn't noticed. There, illuminated by perfect lighting, hung 12 framed pieces of artwork she instantly recognized. "These are from my students," Sydney gasped. Each piece was accompanied by an artist's statement and starting bid significantly higher than she would have imagined possible. I suggested that instead of auctioning golf clubs or weekend getaways, we might offer something with soul, Joss explained. Every cent goes directly to the center's scholarship fund. Sydney turned to him, momentarily forgetting their public setting. This is extraordinary. These children have never had their work seen outside our neighborhood, let alone valued like this. They deserve to be seen, Joss replied simply. As do you. Their moment was interrupted by Margaret Pemberton, Joss's godmother, whose sharp assessment of Sydney quickly turned to approval. I like her, Josiah, she declared after their conversation. She hasn't once mentioned your net worth or family connections, which already places her leagues above your usual companions. Later, as the auction commenced, Sydney watched in astonishment as her students' artwork triggered spirited bidding wars, ultimately fetching prices that would fund scholarships for years to come. When one piece sold for an amount exceeding her annual salary, tears pricked her eyes. As formal proceedings concluded, Joss led Sydney to the dance floor. Was it terribly arduous? He asked, guiding her through elegant steps. My world, I mean. Not arduous, just different, Sydney replied honestly. Everyone seems to be performing rather than simply being. Including me? Joss asked, vulnerability flickering across his features. At times, Sydney acknowledged gently. There's a version of you that emerges here, more polished, more strategic. She touched his face. But I still see you beneath it. And what do you see? Joss asked, drawing her fractionally closer. The man who gets lost in creating a simple, still life for hours. The man who brings me coffee exactly how I like it. The man who sees value in children's artwork. Sydney's voice softened. That's the man I'm falling in love with, Joss. The confession hung between them, unplanned yet undeniable. Before Joss could respond, they were interrupted by an approaching couple. Joss, there you are, the man called. We've been trying to catch you all evening. Joss introduced Calvin Porter and his wife, with Sydney quickly assessing Calvin as the kind of businessman who measured worth entirely in financial terms. We were just admiring your date's little art project, Calvin remarked condescendingly. Clever PR move. Speaking of good causes, have you considered our proposal for the Monroe Street development? Perfect location for your new tech campus? Sydney felt Joss stiffen beside her. Monroe Street, she repeated. In the East District. Prime real estate, Calvin confirmed. Currently wasted on outdated housing and small businesses. Most of my students live in that neighborhood, Sydney said quietly, pieces falling into place. Those outdated housing units are their homes. As Calvin departed, Sydney stepped back from Joss, emotional distance matching physical withdrawal. Your company is planning to displace dozens of families from affordable housing. Families whose children come to my center. It's complicated, Sydney, Joss explained. I've been fighting the board on this for months. That's why I've been avoiding Calvin. But you're the CEO, Sydney pressed. Doesn't the final decision rest with you? In theory, Joss admitted. "But I answer to shareholders who see only profit margins. I've been trying to find alternative locations." Sydney shook her head, the beautiful evening suddenly tarnished. "I need some air." On the terrace, Joss joined her. "Please believe me, I've been fighting this project for exactly the reasons you're upset." Sydney turned to face him. "Then use tonight. All these wealthy people who just spent thousands on children's artwork. Make them see the connection between valuing these kids' creative expression and valuing their actual lives and homes." Joss stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "You're absolutely right." Sydney watched in confusion as Joss re-entered the ballroom with renewed purpose and approached the stage. Taking a microphone, he addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, those talented young artists we've celebrated tonight are facing displacement from their homes due to development projects that prioritize profit over community." The room fell silent as he continued. "I'm announcing tonight that Horizon Tech is withdrawing from the Monroe Street development as currently proposed. Instead, we're initiating a collaborative redesign that will include affordable housing units, community spaces, and an expanded arts center." When Joss rejoined Sydney on the terrace, his expression mixed liberation with apprehension. "Your board looks apoplectic," Sydney observed. "They'll survive," Joss replied, "or they won't, and we'll rebuild with people who share this vision." Sydney studied him with new eyes. "You might have just torpedoed your career." "Perhaps," Joss acknowledged, taking her hands, "but I've rediscovered something far more valuable." His voice softened. "And for what it's worth, I'm falling in love with you too, Sydney LaRue." "Prove it," she whispered, her challenge gentle yet unmistakable. Joss's response was to draw her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the complexity of their worlds colliding, tender yet passionate, reverent yet demanding. When they finally parted, Sydney rested her forehead against his. "This won't be easy. Your world and mine. They operate by entirely different rules." "Then perhaps it's time to write new ones," Joss replied, his arms secure around her. Together. Chapter 6. The Storm. The aftermath of Joss's announcement at the gala sent shockwaves through Horizon Tech. Board members threatened resignation, investors demanded explanations, and business publications questioned the company's new direction. Through it all, Joss remained steadfast, assembling a team that included Sydney to reimagine the Monroe Street project as a community-integrated development. Their relationship deepened with each passing week. Mornings found them tangled in Sydney's sheets, evenings spent sharing dreams and fears. In these intimate moments, Sydney discovered layers to Joss that his corporate image concealed: his lingering passion for art, his quiet insecurities, his genuine desire to create meaningful change. One morning after Joss left for a meeting with Singapore investors, Sydney received an unexpected visitor. Margaret Pemberton arrived at her door, elegant as ever in a tailored pantsuit. "Joss has changed," Margaret stated after pleasantries. "Fundamentally, and I believe permanently." "I hope that's a positive observation," Sydney replied carefully. "Entirely," Margaret assured her. "I've known that boy since he was 10. He's finally becoming the man he was meant to be." She paused, stirring her tea. "However, not everyone is pleased with this evolution, particularly his father." Sydney frowned. "Joss rarely mentions his family. Lawrence Butler considers his son's recent decisions a personal affront to the family legacy," Margaret explained. "The Monroe Street reversal particularly infuriated him, as Lawrence has investment ties to Calvin Porter's development group." Margaret leaned forward. "Lawrence has requested a meeting with Joss, the first in nearly 5 years. He holds considerable sway with certain board members and investors. His disapproval could create significant obstacles beyond mere family tension." That evening, Sydney gently broached the subject. Joss's expression immediately closed. Margaret should focus on her charity galas and leave my family matters alone, he said tensely. She's concerned about you, Sydney persisted. As am I. Joe sighed, defenses finally lowering. My father has never approved of anything I've done, but he's tolerated my rebellion because I've been financially successful. His eyes met hers. The Monroe Street decision threatens that tolerance. It suggests I value principles over profit. Which you do, Sydney observed. Yes, Joss admitted, but acknowledging that publicly complicates everything. My father could create significant obstacles with the board and investors. You don't have to face him alone, Sydney offered. Joss looked up, surprised. You're offering to come with me? If you want me there, yes. Joss studied her with wonder. You have no idea what you'd be walking into. Joe smiled genuinely for the first time that evening. You probably could. But this is my battle. I've been avoiding it for years, but it's time I faced him directly. The day of the meeting arrived with appropriate drama, dark clouds gathering over the city. Joss dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, armor for the confrontation ahead. Remember who you are, Sydney said softly, straightening his tie. Not who he wants you to be. Lawrence Butler had chosen his exclusive club for their meeting, territory where he held every advantage. He wasted no time addressing his concerns. This meeting isn't about your misguided development strategy, Lawrence said coldly after pleasantries. It's about the woman who's clearly influenced this decision. Sydney has nothing to do with this, Joss replied firmly. Please, Lawrence scoffed. You've been running Horizon Tech like a proper CEO for years. Then suddenly you meet this community art teacher, and within months you're sabotaging a lucrative development opportunity. I changed course because it was the right decision, Joss stated. Sydney helped me see what I already knew but had been ignoring. Lawrence's expression darkened. I've had you investigated, you know. Both of you. Joss's knuckles whitened. You had no right. You're Sydney LaRue, raised in foster care, governmental assistance through college, perpetually in debt from funding her little art center. His lip curled. She's quite beautiful, I'll grant you that. But surely you can see this relationship has no future. Joss leaned forward, anger simmering beneath his controlled exterior. Sydney has more integrity, talent, and genuine compassion than anyone in your social circle. She creates actual value in the world, not just wealth. I'm not unsympathetic to physical attraction, Lawrence continued dismissively. By all means, enjoy your artist. But this public romance allowing her to influence business decisions, it's gone too far. Joss stood abruptly, but Lawrence stopped him with his next words. The family business needs you, Josiah. Return to where you belong, and I'll ensure the Monroe Street project proceeds with minimal displacement. I'll even establish a substantial endowment for your girlfriend's art center. The blatant manipulation clarified everything for Joss. You fundamentally misunderstand what's happening here, Joss said quietly. I'm not having some rebellious phase. I'm finally becoming the man I was meant to be before I started trying to earn your approval. He leaned forward with newfound certainty. Keep your investigations, your manipulations, and your money. I don't need your approval anymore, and I certainly don't need your permission to love someone who reminds me daily what actually matters. Outside, thunder cracked dramatically as Joss walked away, his father's voice following him with one final threat. You'll regret this decision, Josiah. I guarantee it. The predicted storm had fully engulfed the city by the time Joss reached Sydney's apartment. She opened the door to find him drenched but transformed, radiating a strange, peaceful certainty. That bad? She asked, helping him out of his soaked jacket. Actually, that good, Joss replied. For the first time in my life, I saw my father clearly, not as the towering figure I've been trying to please, but as a small, controlling man who never understood what actually matters. As Jose recounted the confrontation, Sydney's expression shifted from concern to outrage to pride. When he described his final rejection of his father's manipulations, she took his face between her hands. "I am so proud of you," she whispered fiercely. Jaws captured her wrists gently. "He'll retaliate. He has connections with board members, investors. Things might get difficult." Sydney's eyes never wavered. "Then we'll face it together. I'm not afraid of difficult, Jose." The storm outside intensified, but within Sydney's apartment, something weathered and beautiful was solidifying between them. A connection forged through mutual respect and shared values rather than convenience or surface attraction. "Whatever comes next, we face it together," Jose said, his voice firm with conviction as he held Sydney close. "My father has never understood that true strength comes from partnership, not power." Sydney nodded against his chest, the sound of rain providing a rhythmic backdrop to their embrace. "Partnership," she repeated softly. "I like that word." Chapter 7. Meeting Worlds. Lawrence Butler's retaliation was swift and calculated. Within days of Jose's confrontation with his father, 2 board members with long-standing ties to the Butler family resigned, citing philosophical differences with the company's direction. An influential tech publication ran a skeptical piece, questioning whether Horizon Tech was abandoning its fiduciary responsibilities in pursuit of social justice credentials. International investors with connections to Butler Financial Group placed their commitments under review, creating immediate stock volatility. Most concerning was the lawsuit filed by Calvin Porter's development group, claiming breach of contract regarding the Monroe Street property. Though they had never signed final papers, Porter argued their preliminary agreements constituted a binding commitment. The law firm representing him, Harrington, Wells, and Mitchell, had been the Butler family's legal counsel for 3 generations. "Your father doesn't waste time," Sydney observed as Jose reviewed the lawsuit documents spread across her kitchen table. Dark circles under his eyes testified to sleepless nights, managing the cascading crises. "He believes if he applies enough pressure, I'll capitulate," Joss replied, rubbing his temples. "Return to the family fold, abandon the community-integrated model, and you." Sydney felt a pang of guilt. "Joss, if I'm making things more difficult—" "Don't," Joss interrupted firmly. "That's exactly what he wants, for you to feel responsible, to create distance between us." He took her hand. "My father understands power but not purpose. He can't comprehend that fighting for something meaningful makes the struggle worthwhile." Sydney squeezed his hand, though doubt lingered. The intensity of Lawrence's opposition made their relationship feel simultaneously precious and precarious. Over the following weeks, Sydney watched Jose navigate these challenges with growing admiration. Rather than retreating, he became more determined, more innovative in his approach. When a major investment group withdrew support, Joss personally traveled to meet with progressive investors who valued ethical development. When traditional business allies distanced themselves, he formed new alliances with forward-thinking entrepreneurs who recognized the market potential of community-integrated projects. "You're changing the paradigm," Sydney observed one evening as they prepared dinner together in her small kitchen, moving around each other with the comfortable synchronicity they'd developed. Jose smiled, chopping vegetables with unexpected skill. "Someone very wise once taught me that the most beautiful creations often emerge from disruption." Their relationship deepened as their worlds increasingly merged. Jose became a familiar figure at the Arts Center, rolling up his sleeves to help with weekend programs and offering business advice to older students interested in creative entrepreneurship. Sydney, meanwhile, found herself navigating Jose's professional environment with growing confidence, her authentic perspective valued by progressive investors and community partners alike. The pressure affected them both, however. Joss worked increasingly long hours, fighting battles on multiple fronts. Sydney threw herself into center activities, partly from passion but also from worry that her presence in Joss's life was complicating an already difficult situation. Their time together became precious but limited, often interrupted by urgent calls or emails. The strain reached breaking point when Sydney attended a gallery opening featuring one of her former students, now a rising star in the art world. Joss had promised to join her, but texted at the last minute. Another emergency board meeting required his presence. Sydney understood logically, but emotion doesn't always follow logic. Walking alone through the crowded gallery, hearing couples discussing the artwork, she felt a familiar loneliness resurface, the isolation of the foster child always on the outside looking in. Later that night, Joss arrived at her apartment, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "The investors from Dubai threatened to pull out unless I personally addressed their concerns." "I understand," Sydney replied, her tone carefully neutral. Joss studied her. "But you're still upset." "Not upset," Sydney corrected, searching for the right words. "Just wondering if this is sustainable." "The company situation will stabilize," Joss assured her, misunderstanding. "I'm not talking about Horizon Tech," Sydney clarified. "I'm talking about us, about trying to build something meaningful while our worlds are simultaneously colliding and pulling us apart." Joss's expression shifted to concern. "What are you saying?" Sydney sat beside him, taking his hand. "I love you, Joss. These past months have been extraordinary, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm complicating everything for you." "That's my father talking," Joss said firmly. "Don't let him get into your head." "It's not just your father," Sydney insisted. "It's reality. Your world operates by different rules than mine. You're fighting so many battles right now. The board, investors, the lawsuit. Maybe ... Maybe what? Joss prompted when she hesitated. "Maybe we need to step back until things stabilize," Sydney suggested, the words painful to speak. "Give you space to secure your company's future without relationship complications." Joe stared at her incredulously. "You think what we have is a complication?" "From a practical perspective?" "Yes," Sydney admitted honestly. "Your life would be simpler right now without me in it." "Simpler and infinitely less meaningful," Joss countered, taking both her hands. "Sydney, you're not a complication. You're my clarity. Everything I'm fighting for, the ethical development, the community integration, even standing up to my father, it's all an extension of what you've helped me rediscover in myself." He drew her closer, his gaze intense. "Don't let my father win by making you doubt us." "That's exactly what he wants." Sydney wanted desperately to believe him, but years of self-reliance had taught her caution. "I just don't want to be the reason your vision fails." "You're the reason my vision exists at all," Joss replied. "Whatever challenges we're facing, we face them together. Promise me you won't pull away just when I need you most." Looking into his eyes, Sydney saw not just the passionate man she'd fallen in love with, but a partner who truly saw her as an equal, not a liability. She realized she was falling into familiar patterns, pushing away connection before it could be taken from her. "I promise," she whispered, allowing herself to believe in something more permanent than her past had prepared her for. Joss sealed her promise with a kiss that spoke of possession and protection, of a man who had found his center and would not easily be moved from it again. Later that night, as Joss slept beside her, Sydney made a quiet decision. If they were truly partners, she needed to contribute her strengths to their shared battles. She couldn't fight corporate lawyers or sway investors, but she understood community and had her own kind of influence. It was time to use it. Chapter 8. Recognition and Doubt. 3 weeks later, Sydney stood nervously in the community center's main gallery, surveying the transformed space. Student artwork hung professionally alongside pieces from established artists who had donated their work for the exhibition. Local journalists mingled with neighborhood families and, most surprisingly, several influential art world figures who had accepted her invitation. "This is extraordinary," Jose murmured beside her, looking handsome in a casual blazer, deliberately dressed down to make community members comfortable. "How did you organize all this in just 3 weeks?" Sydney smiled. "I have my own network. Not as wealthy as yours, perhaps, but passionate about arts education." The exhibition, titled Community Vision, Monroe Street Reimagined, showcased artwork depicting the neighborhood's past, present, and potential future. Local residents had worked with Sydney's students to create visual representations of their hopes for the development. Green spaces, affordable housing, community facilities integrated with commercial areas. The result was a powerful visual argument for the very model Joss was fighting to implement. "Miss LaRue," a reporter approached, notebook in hand. "Can you explain the concept behind tonight's exhibition?" Sydney spoke with quiet confidence about community collaboration and the transformative power of art as a planning tool. As cameras flashed and more journalists gathered, she redirected attention to the neighborhood residents who had contributed their visions. "This isn't just art for art's sake," she explained. "This is visual testimony from the people most affected by development decisions, those who actually live in these neighborhoods." Joss watched with undisguised admiration as Sydney navigated interviews, introduced community members to potential donors, and created connections between worlds that rarely intersected. This was her element, and she moved through it with natural grace that drew people into her vision. The exhibition's impact exceeded even Sydney's hopes. The visual presentation of community needs resonated emotionally in ways that technical proposals couldn't match. Several influential city council members in attendance publicly endorsed the integrated development approach. A prominent architecture journal committed to a feature spread. Most significantly, the human stories behind the artwork neutralized portrayal of the development as merely a corporate social responsibility tactic. "You've completely changed the narrative," Jose told Sydney later that night as they walked home beneath star-filled skies. "The lawsuit looks petty in contrast to this community solidarity." Sydney squeezed his hand. "We're stronger together. Your corporate brilliance, my community connections." The exhibition marked a turning point in the Monroe Street battle. Positive press began outweighing negative. 2 board members who had been wavering publicly affirmed their support for Jose's vision. The Community Advisory Board, energized by the exhibition's success, became more vocal advocates in city planning meetings. Even Joss's professional world began showing Sydney increased respect. Margaret Pemberton hosted a dinner where Sydney was seated beside the dean of the city's prestigious Art Institute, leading to discussions about potential collaboration with her center. When an architectural magazine interviewed Jose about the development, he insisted Sydney join the conversation as a community partner. "Your girlfriend is quite impressive," the journalist commented afterward. "Not at all what I expected." Joss raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly did you expect?" The journalist had the grace to look embarrassed. "The rumors suggested she was, well, perhaps out of her depth in your world." "The truth," Joss replied with elegant precision, "is that I'm working to be worthy of hers." As autumn transitioned to winter, their relationship flourished alongside their professional collaboration. Sydney found herself increasingly comfortable in Jose's world, while he discovered genuine joy in her community-centered life. They established rituals that honored both. Elegant restaurant dinners followed by walks through Sydney's eclectic neighborhood, Sunday mornings in his luxury apartment, balanced by afternoons helping at community center events. Even the lawsuit showed signs of resolution. Joss's legal team had found inconsistencies in Calvin Porter's claims, and settlement discussions had begun. Though Porter publicly maintained his position, privately he acknowledged the shifting public sentiment made fighting the community-integrated model increasingly difficult. Then came an unexpected invitation that tested their carefully constructed balance. "The Global Innovation Summit in London," Sydney repeated, reading the formal invitation Joss had handed her. "For 2 weeks. I've been asked to deliver the keynote on ethical urban development," Joss explained, unable to hide his excitement. "Our Monroe Street project is being featured as a case study in community-integrated corporate expansion." Sydney smiled, genuinely happy for this recognition. "That's extraordinary, Joss. You've changed the conversation globally." "We've changed it," Joss corrected. "That's why the invitation includes you. They want both corporate and community perspectives represented." Sydney's smile faltered slightly. "London, for 2 weeks. Is that a problem?" Joss asked, noticing her hesitation. "No, of course not," Sydney assured him quickly. "It's just the center's winter program is starting, and we have the grant proposal deadline." "We'd leave after the program launch," Joss offered, "and you could work on the grant proposal from London." "My family has a flat in Kensington we could use." The casual mention of his family's London property highlighted yet again the vast differences in their backgrounds. Sydney pushed aside the momentary disorientation. "It sounds wonderful," she said, meaning it despite her lingering concerns. As they began preparations for the London trip, the final pieces of their professional collaboration were falling into place. The lawsuit with Porter was moving towards settlement. The board had officially approved the community-integrated development model, and Sydney's center was being studied as an exemplary case of arts-based community engagement. Yet alongside these victories, subtle tension remained. Sydney sometimes caught Joss watching her with an expression that seemed to contain a question he couldn't quite articulate. And Sydney herself occasionally felt vertigo at the rapid evolution of her life, from struggling community arts director to international speaker and respected partner of a corporate visionary. As they packed for London, Sydney found herself wondering what awaited them across the ocean, not just professionally but personally. Their relationship had been forged in the crucible of local conflict and triumph. How would it transform when tested on a global stage? Chapter 9: The Separation. London greeted them with characteristic contradiction: gloomy skies and warm welcomes. The Global Innovation Summit had arranged accommodations at a historic hotel near the conference center, but Joss suggested they use his family's Kensington apartment instead. "More privacy," he explained as their taxi navigated busy streets, "and space for you to work on your grant proposal." The flat proved to be an elegant townhouse overlooking a private garden square. Sydney tried to hide her astonishment at its grandeur: original moldings, museum-quality artwork, antique furniture that had clearly welcomed generations of butlers. "My grandfather purchased it in the 1950s, Joss explained, watching her explore. "It's rarely used now except for family business trips." Sydney traced a finger over a Monet landscape hanging casually in the entryway. "Just a little vacation home with priceless artwork," she teased, masking her discomfort with humor. Their first week unfolded with busy separation. Joss attending summit sessions and preliminary meetings, Sydney dividing time between exploring London's art museums and developing the grant proposal for her center. They reunited each evening, sharing discoveries and challenges over dinner at Joss's favorite local restaurants. On their 6th night, Joss returned to the apartment unusually tense. "My father made his first appearance today," he explained, loosening his tie with uncharacteristic aggression. "He's arranged a welcome reception for summit speakers tomorrow evening. We're expected to attend." Sydney set aside her laptop. Did you speak with him? Briefly. He was surprisingly cordial, Joss replied, pouring himself a rare second scotch, which only confirms he's planning something. The reception was held at the headquarters of Butler Financial Group, a historic building in the city's banking district. Sydney wore a simple black dress that Margaret had helped her select before their departure, elegant enough for the occasion while maintaining her artistic identity. Ready? Joss asked as their car approached the illuminated building. Sydney squeezed his hand. Remember who you are. Lawrence Butler played perfect host, his charisma evident in the easy way he navigated between diverse guests. When he finally approached them, his smile appeared genuinely welcoming. Josiah, he greeted warmly, embracing his son with practiced affection. Your keynote has generated quite the buzz. He turned to Sydney with calculated charm. And you must be the remarkable Ms. LaRue. I've heard so much about your community work. Sydney accepted his extended hand with composed dignity. Mr. Butler, thank you for including me in the invitation. Please call me Lawrence, he insisted. After all, you've become quite important to my son. The conversation maintained pleasant surfaces, Lawrence demonstrating impressive knowledge of Sydney's arts center and recent exhibition. Yet beneath the courtesy, Sydney sensed careful assessment, a predator gauging weaknesses. You must join me for lunch tomorrow, Lawrence suggested as they prepared to move on. Both of you. My club makes an excellent Dover sole. Joss began to decline, but Sydney interjected smoothly. We'd be delighted. Excellent. Lawrence appeared genuinely pleased. My assistant will confirm details. As they circulated among other guests, Joss leaned close to Sydney's ear. That was unexpected. Know your enemy, Sydney replied quietly. I want to understand what we're dealing with. The lunch proved even more surprising. Lawrence arrived without entourage, maintaining charming conversation throughout the meal. He shared family stories that humanized Joss's childhood, asked thoughtful questions about Sydney's teaching philosophy, and spoke with apparent admiration about the Monroe Street development's innovative approach. You've transformed my son's perspective, Lawrence told Sydney over dessert, his tone seemingly sincere. I may have disagreed with the timing of certain decisions, but I cannot argue with the results. Horizon Tech's ethical development model is generating international interest. Joss maintained skeptical silence, but Sydney engaged openly, her background in navigating manipulative foster parents, helping her distinguish performance from authenticity. By meal's end, she had formed a clear assessment. Lawrence Butler was executing a carefully planned strategy, though its specific purpose remained unclear. That evening, Joss received an unexpected call. The summit organizers had added a panel discussion on balancing community needs with corporate interests. They wanted Sydney to participate, representing the community perspective alongside corporate developers. It's a tremendous opportunity, Joss observed after she agreed. The panel has global live stream coverage. Sydney nodded, though uncertainty nagged. Strange timing, though. The program was finalized months ago. You think my father arranged it? Joss asked, connecting implications. It seems likely, Sydney acknowledged. The question is why? The answer emerged the following morning when Sydney received a personal email from Lawrence Butler. Its contents were both shocking and illuminating, an offer to fund a global expansion of her arts education model through the Butler Foundation, with one condition. She would need to relocate to the Foundation's Swiss headquarters for a minimum 2-year development period. The message concluded with devastating clarity. This opportunity allows you to achieve your life's mission on a global scale, while giving Josiah space to secure his corporate legacy without personal distractions. Consider it a pathway where both of you can achieve your highest potential, separately. Sydney stared at the message, its elegant cruelty taking her breath away. The offer was genuine. Lawrence had clearly researched her work thoroughly enough to craft an opportunity perfectly aligned with her professional dreams. The separation it required was presented as mutual benefit rather than manipulative demand. Most disturbingly, it activated Sydney's deepest insecurities, that her relationship with Jose ultimately limited both of them, that their different worlds were fundamentally incompatible long-term. Jose found her still seated at the desk, staring at the computer screen. "Sydney, the car's waiting. Your panel starts in an hour." She wordlessly turned the screen toward him. Joss read quickly, his expression hardening with each line. "Divide and conquer," he said flatly. "Classic Lawrence strategy." "It's actually a remarkable opportunity," Sydney admitted quietly. "The Foundation has resources to implement arts education globally." "You're not seriously considering it," Joss stated, disbelief evident. "Of course not as presented," Sydney clarified, "but it raises valid questions we've been avoiding. Your company operates internationally. My work is deeply rooted in local community. Eventually, these differences will create impossible choices." "They're only impossible if we make them binary," Jose argued. "My father wants you to believe we must choose between relationship and individual purpose. It's a false dichotomy." Sydney stood, gathering her notes for the panel. "We need to discuss this properly, but right now I have to focus on this presentation." The panel discussion assembled in the summit's main hall, filled with international attendees and media. Sydney took her place alongside corporate developers and city planners, acutely aware of Lawrence Butler seated prominently in the front row. As the discussion progressed, Sydney articulated the community perspective with passionate clarity, drawing on her experience with Monroe Street. The audience responded enthusiastically to her authentic insights, particularly her emphasis on development as potential community partnership rather than inevitable displacement. During the question period, a woman identified as a Butler Foundation representative stood. "Ms. LaRue, your arts education model has shown remarkable success locally. Have you considered the potential for global implementation?" The planted question hung in the air. Sydney felt Lawrence watching intently, aware this moment represented his carefully orchestrated trap. A simple affirmative response would publicly establish her broader ambitions, creating the foundation for his separation strategy. Sydney took a measured breath before responding. "Arts education must be simultaneously universal and specific," she began thoughtfully. "While creative development principles apply globally, effective implementation must honor local cultural contexts and community voices." She paused, looking directly at Lawrence. "This requires deep collaboration between educators and communities, between corporate resources and local knowledge, between seemingly different worlds that actually share fundamental values. The most powerful impacts happen not through isolation, but through genuine partnership." The room erupted in applause. Lawrence's expression remained impassive, but Sydney detected the slight tightening around his eyes that signaled recalculation. Joss was waiting backstage, his proud smile confirming he'd understood the layered meaning in her response. "Brilliantly handled. We still need that proper discussion," Sydney reminded him. Their conversation unfolded that evening in the private garden behind the townhouse. Autumn leaves spiraled around them as they confronted questions most couples could postpone indefinitely. "My father's offer wasn't entirely wrong," Joss admitted reluctantly. "Horizon Tech is expanding internationally. The ethical development model will require global implementation." "And my work has always been local, community-centered," Sydney acknowledged. "These differences are real, Jose, but not insurmountable," he insisted. "Technology allows remote leadership. Community models can be adapted across contexts. We can create flexibility neither of us could achieve alone." Sydney considered his perspective. Your father believes our relationship ultimately limits both of us professionally, that we'll eventually resent the compromises. Joss took her hands, his expression intensely focused. My father measures success through traditional power metrics, wealth accumulation, market control, dynasty building. His entire worldview depends on believing those metrics matter most. And you believe differently? Sydney asked, though she already knew the answer. I believe the greatest success is building a life of meaning and purpose, Jose replied simply, which for me now includes loving you. The clarity of his perspective settled something within Sydney. Lawrence Butler's manipulations had forced them to confront important questions, but the answers were theirs alone to determine. I need to return to my community, Sydney said finally. My students, my center, they're my foundation. But that doesn't mean I can't expand my vision. Joss nodded, understanding her meaning. And I need to implement this development model internationally, but that doesn't mean I can't maintain roots where my heart resides. They sat in thoughtful silence as darkness fell around them. The path ahead wasn't perfectly clear, but they had affirmed something essential, their commitment to finding solutions that honored both relationship and individual purpose. So what do we tell my father? Jose asked eventually. Sydney smiled, a plan forming. The truth, just not the one he's expecting. The summit's closing reception provided their opportunity. Lawrence approached confidently, clearly expecting news of their separation following his strategic maneuvering. I understand. Congratulations are in order, Miss LaRue, he began smoothly. Your panel presentation generated significant interest from several foundations. Yes, Sydney confirmed, including a particularly interesting offer from the Butler Foundation. Lawrence's smile widened fractionally. I hope you're giving it serious consideration. Actually, Father, Joss interjected, sliding his arm around Sydney's waist. We've discussed it thoroughly and reached a decision. Lawrence's attention sharpened, anticipating victory. We're establishing a joint initiative, Sydney continued seamlessly. The Horizon Community Arts Alliance, combining corporate B with community-centered implementation, global reach with local authenticity. I'll oversee international development partnerships, Joss explained, while Sydney directs educational programming, splitting time between our flagship center and regional implementations. Lawrence's expression froze, processing the unexpected consolidation rather than division of their efforts. We're quite excited, Sydney added pleasantly. Your offer actually inspired us to formalize the collaboration we've been naturally developing. Lawrence recovered quickly, his smile thinning. How innovative. Though I wonder if the Foundation's board will approve such an unconventional arrangement. They might not, Joss acknowledged easily. Fortunately, several other foundations expressed interest after Sydney's presentation. Global arts education appears to be an emerging priority. The strategic defeat registered in Lawrence's eyes, though his public composure never wavered. Well then, I wish you both every success with your joint venture. As he walked away, Sydney leaned closer to Joss. Round one to us, I believe. Joss laughed softly. There will be more rounds. He's persistent. So are we, Sydney replied confidently. That night, they lay together in the moonlit bedroom of the Butler townhouse, discussing practical implementations of their newly articulated vision. The details weren't simple, maintaining her community center while developing broader programming, structuring his leadership to allow strategic travel without abandoning their home base. But the shared commitment made seemingly insurmountable obstacles merely complex problems requiring creative solutions. I need to return home next week, Sydney said eventually. The winter program needs attention, and honestly, I miss my students. I understand, Joss replied, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. The summit continues another week, then I have meetings in Paris. They were discussing their inevitable temporary separation when Joss suddenly sat up, struck by inspiration. "What if we created a symbol?" he suggested. "Something tangible to remind us that distance doesn't diminish connection." The idea resonated with Sydney's artistic sensibility. The following day, they visited a small jeweler in London's oldest arcade. There, they selected matching simple platinum bands, not as engagement symbols, but as physical reminders of their commitment to finding balance between togetherness and individual purpose. "Not traditional wedding rings," Sydney clarified as the jeweler sized them. "More like a promise that distance doesn't mean disconnection." "A reminder that we're creating something new," Joss agreed. "A relationship that doesn't force us to choose between love and purpose." When they parted at Heathrow the following week, the matching bands gleamed on their right hands, subtle symbols of their commitment to the unconventional path they were forging together. "3 weeks," Joss promised, kissing her goodbye. "Then I'll be home." Sydney nodded, touching her ring. "We'll make it work." Chapter 10. Full Circle. The train rocks gently as Sydney sits in the exact seat where she first encountered Joss 1 year ago. Rain patters against the windows, creating rivulets that trace unpredictable paths down the glass. Her fingers absently touch the platinum band on her right hand, their promise ring, a symbol of the unique path they've created together over the past year. 1 year. It seems impossible that so much could change in 12 short months. The Monroe Street project is now breaking ground, community input integrated into every aspect of its design. The lawsuit with Calvin Porter was settled last month, his development group agreeing to partner with Horizon Tech rather than oppose them. The Horizon Community Arts Alliance has secured funding from 3 major foundations, allowing Sydney's educational model to expand while maintaining its community roots. Most remarkably, Lawrence Butler has maintained a wary distance rather than continued opposition. Joss believes his father is studying their model, trying to understand its unexpected success. Sydney suspects the elder Butler is simply regrouping, planning his next strategic move in what he likely sees as a long game. The train slows as it approaches the central station, and Sydney gathers her portfolio, a new leather one Joss gave her for their 1-year anniversary, though she insisted on keeping the old one as well. "Some things shouldn't be replaced, just honored," she told him, and the understanding in his eyes confirmed yet again why she loves him. She's so lost in thought that she almost misses the familiar figure sitting several rows ahead. Broad shoulders, perfectly tailored suit, that distinctive profile she's come to memorize in all its expressions. Joss is on the train. Her heart quickens as she realizes he's sitting in the exact same seat he occupied when they first met. Joss was supposed to be returning from Paris today, but they'd planned to meet at the apartment they now share. Not here on this specific train, in this specific car, in that specific seat. The perfect symmetry of the moment can't be coincidence. As if sensing her gaze, Joss turns, their eyes meeting across the crowded car. A smile spreads across his face, not the polished corporate smile he uses for business associates, but the real one, the one that crinkles the corners of his eyes and makes him look younger, more carefree. He pats his pockets with exaggerated concern, mimicking their first encounter with playful precision. Sydney's laugh bubbles up spontaneously, drawing curious glances from other passengers as she makes her way toward him. "Forget your wallet again?" she asks, sliding into the seat beside him. Joss's eyes dance with mischief and something deeper, more profound. "Actually, I have something for you this time." He reaches into his pocket and withdraws not a wallet but a small velvet box. Sydney's breath catches as he opens it, revealing a stunning emerald ring nestled against dark velvet. "I deliberately chose this train, this car, this exact seat," Joss explains, his voice low with emotion. Because 1 year ago today, a remarkable woman paid my fare without expectation of return. That simple act of kindness changed everything. Sydney stares at the ring, then at the man holding it, the sophisticated executive and passionate artist who has become her partner in every sense of the word. Joss, we've spent a year proving we can build something unprecedented together, he continues, creating balance between togetherness and individual purpose, between your world and mine. His eyes hold hers with unwavering certainty. I don't want to continue that journey as partners in business and love alone. I want to formalize our commitment in every possible way. Around them, the train has stopped, passengers streaming toward exits, yet they remain in their private moment, the world simultaneously present and irrelevant. Sydney LaRue, Joe says, taking her hand, will you marry me? Not as a traditional arrangement that requires either of us to diminish, but as equal partners creating something beautiful and unprecedented together. Sydney's free hand rises to cover her mouth, emotions overwhelming her usual composure. This moment, in this specific location, represents everything their relationship embodies, the beautiful symmetry of a full-circle journey that has transformed them both. Yes, she whispers, then louder with increasing certainty. Yes. Joss slips the emerald ring onto her left hand, the platinum band remaining on her right, dual symbols of their unique path. As he leans forward to seal their commitment with a kiss, spontaneous applause erupts from the remaining passengers who have witnessed this unexpected romantic moment. We've missed our stop, Sydney murmurs against his lips, laughing softly. I don't care, Joss replies, drawing her closer. We'll find our way together. We always do. The train begins moving again, carrying them past their intended destination, but neither makes any move to pull the stop request. There's something perfectly appropriate about continuing beyond planned endpoints. Their relationship has always been about discovering unexpected destinations, rather than adhering to predetermined routes. In this moment, on this train where everything began, they are perfectly present. Two people who found each other against impossible odds and created something neither could have imagined alone. A love that doesn't demand sacrifice but inspires growth. A partnership that values both individuality and connection. A journey that has only just begun. The cityscape blurs outside the windows as the train gathers speed, carrying them forward into a future they'll continue to create together. One moment, one challenge, one triumph at a time. Just like their first meeting, they don't know exactly where this journey will lead, but this time they're traveling together, and that makes all the difference.